The bullet that had been meant for Thomas Caldwell's heart had taken his faith in redemption instead, leaving him alive but hollowed out in ways no doctor could fix. He stood behind the bar of his saloon in Quartzsite, Arizona territory, pouring whiskey for dusty miners and drifters in the sweltering summer of 1882. A man who had learned that second chances were nothing but fool's gold, glittering promises that crumbled to dust in your hands. The afternoon heat shimmered through the warped glass windows, distorting the desert landscape beyond into something that looked like a fever dream. Thomas wiped down the scarred wooden counter with methodical precision, his movements economical and practiced. At 32 years old, he had the bearing of someone much older, his dark hair touched with premature gray at the temples, his green eyes holding shadows that spoke of losses he never discussed. "Another round, Caldwell," called out Pete Morrison, a prospector who spent more time at the bar than in the hills searching for silver. Thomas poured without comment, collecting the coins and depositing them in the cash box beneath the counter. The saloon was his refuge and his prison, a place where he could exist without having to feel too much, where the conversations flowed around him like water around a stone. The day his wife Sarah had died 3 years ago, he had made a silent vow never to let anyone close enough to hurt him again. She had been 26, vibrant and full of plans for their future, and then a fever had swept through Quartzsite, taking her in less than a week. He had held her hand as the light faded from her eyes, and something inside him had gone dark with her. The late afternoon sun was painting long shadows across the floorboards when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of hot wind and a woman he had never seen before. Thomas glanced up out of habit, his hand still on the bottle he had been shelving, and found himself unable to look away. She was tall and slender, her dark blonde hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, her dress the color of faded indigo. But it was her face that caught him, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of the way she held herself, like someone walking through a storm with her head up, refusing to bow. Her eyes, a striking shade of amber, scanned the room with a mixture of wariness and determination. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear despite an obvious tremor of nervousness. "I am looking for Thomas Caldwell." Every head in the saloon turned toward the bar. Thomas felt a familiar wall slam into place around whatever remained of his heart. "You found him," he said, his tone flat and uninviting. "What do you want?" The woman approached the bar, her hands clutching a worn leather satchel. Up close, Thomas could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way her shoulders held tension like a physical weight. "My name is Olivia Whitmore," she said. "I have traveled from Prescott. Your brother, Jonathan, suggested I speak with you about employment." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. Jonathan, his younger brother by 5 years, had left Quartzsite 6 months ago to start a freight business in Prescott. They exchanged letters occasionally, though Thomas kept his responses brief and impersonal. "What kind of employment?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. The saloon had rooms upstairs that he rented out to travelers, and he had mentioned in passing to Jonathan that managing them had become more trouble than it was worth. "I understand you need someone to manage your boarding rooms," Olivia said. "I can cook, clean, handle accounts." "I am a hard worker, Mr. Caldwell, and I am not looking for charity. Just an honest wage and a place to stay." "I do not need help," Thomas said automatically, though it was not entirely true. The rooms upstairs had fallen into disrepair because he could not bring himself to care about them. It was enough to keep the saloon running. "Jonathan said you would say that," Olivia replied, and for the first time, a hint of emotion crept into her carefully controlled expression. It looked like desperation masked by pride. He also said you were a fair man who would at least hear me out. Thomas set down the bottle with more force than necessary. My brother should mind his own business. Perhaps, Olivia said softly, but I have nowhere else to go, Mr. Caldwell. My husband died 4 months ago. He was a shopkeeper in Prescott, and when he passed, his debts became mine. I lost everything paying them off. Your brother knows my husband's family. He thought you might give me a chance. The words hung in the air between them. Thomas felt the familiar ache in his chest, the one that came whenever he was reminded that he was not the only person who had lost someone. But he had built his fortress of solitude carefully, and he was not about to let it crumble because of a sad story and a pair of amber eyes. There are other towns, he said. Other opportunities. I have tried them, Olivia said, and now he could hear the steel beneath the softness. Do you know what it is like to be a young widow with no family, Mr. Caldwell? Every man who offers help expects something in return. Every respectable woman looks at you like you are either a threat or a cautionary tale. Your brother offered me help without conditions, and he said you were the same kind of man. Was he wrong? The saloon had gone quiet. Thomas could feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes watching this exchange, waiting to see what he would do. He hated being put on the spot, hated the way this woman had walked into his carefully ordered world and upended it in the space of 5 minutes. How old are you? He asked abruptly. 24, Olivia replied without hesitation. Old enough to work hard and keep my word, if that is what you are asking. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration he could not quite suppress. Every instinct told him to send her away, to maintain the safe distance he had cultivated between himself and the rest of humanity. But something in her eyes, that mixture of pride and barely concealed fear, reminded him of Sarah in the early days, when they had been building a life together with nothing but hope and determination. The rooms are a mess, he said finally, the words coming out against his better judgment. I have not had time to maintain them properly. You would have to clean them, change linens, handle repairs when guests damage things. I can offer you room and board plus $30 a month. You would have your own room, and I expect discretion and hard work. Those are my terms. Relief flooded Olivia's face, transforming it. For a moment she looked years younger, and Thomas felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. Thank you, she said, and the gratitude in her voice was genuine. You will not regret this, Mr. Caldwell. I already do, Thomas muttered, but he reached beneath the counter for the spare keys to the upstairs rooms. Come on, I will show you where everything is. He led her through a door at the back of the saloon and up a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. The second floor was dim and stuffy, the windows closed against the desert heat. There were 6 rooms in total, each one small but serviceable, with a bed, a washstand, and a trunk for belongings. You can take the room at the end, Thomas said, unlocking the door to reveal a space that was marginally cleaner than the others. I will expect you to start tomorrow. Guests pay $2 a night, $5 for a week. You keep the rooms clean, provide fresh water in the mornings, and handle any complaints. I do not want to be bothered unless there is a serious problem. Olivia stepped into the room, setting her satchel on the bed. She ran her hand along the windowsill, her fingers coming away dusty. I will have this place spotless by the end of the week, she said, turning to face him. And Mr. Caldwell, thank you, truly. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Do not thank me yet. This is hard work, and I am not an easy man to work for. Keep to yourself, do your job, and we will get along fine. He left before she could respond, taking the stairs 2 at a time in his haste to put distance between them. Back in the saloon, Pete Morrison gave him a knowing look. That is a pretty young widow you just hired, the prospector said with a grin. Might liven up this place." "Shut up and drink your whiskey," Thomas said, but there was no real heat in the words. That night, alone in his small room behind the saloon, Thomas lay awake listening to the soft sounds of Olivia moving around upstairs. He could hear the scrape of furniture being moved, the splash of water being poured. She was already starting, he realized, unable to wait until morning. He thought about Sarah, about the way her laughter had filled their small house, about the dreams they had shared. He thought about the moment he had buried her, standing in the cemetery on the outskirts of town, while the preacher spoke empty words about God's plan. Thomas had not been to church since. Hiring Olivia was a mistake. He knew it with the same certainty he knew the sun would rise over the desert tomorrow morning. She would bring complications into his carefully controlled life, would remind him of things he had worked hard to forget. But he had given his word, and whatever else he had lost, Thomas still had his integrity. He would keep his distance, maintain professional boundaries, and in a few months she would have saved enough money to move on. That was the plan. It was a good plan. It just never occurred to him that life had stopped caring about his plans the day Olivia Whitmore walked through his door. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the saloon when Thomas came downstairs, and he stopped short at the sight that greeted him. The main room, which he had left in its usual state of comfortable disarray, had been transformed. The floors were swept clean, the tables wiped down, the windows actually transparent for the first time in months. Even the brass spittoons gleamed. Olivia emerged from the back room carrying a bucket of dirty water, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, a kerchief tied over her hair. She looked tired but satisfied. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she said. "I hope you do not mind. I could not sleep, so I thought I would make myself useful. I also made coffee and biscuits. They are in the kitchen." Thomas stared at her, caught between irritation and something else he could not quite name. "I did not ask you to clean the saloon." "I know," Olivia said, "but it needed doing and I was awake anyway. Consider it thanks for giving me a chance." She moved past him to dump the water out the back door, and Thomas caught the scent of lye soap and something floral, lavender maybe. It was the first time in 3 years that anything in the saloon had smelled like anything other than whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed men. He found the kitchen, a cramped space behind the bar that he rarely used for more than making coffee. The biscuits were still warm, golden brown and perfect. Thomas picked one up, bit into it, and was surprised by how good it tasted. Flaky and buttery with just a hint of salt. When Olivia returned, he was on his third biscuit. "These are good," he said grudgingly. Her face lit up with pleasure. "My mother taught me to bake. She said a woman who could make good biscuits would never go hungry." "Your mother was a smart woman." "She was," Olivia said, and a shadow passed over her face. "She died when I was 16, cholera outbreak in Missouri where we lived before coming west." Thomas knew he should say something, offer some word of comfort or sympathy, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he finished his coffee and set the cup down with a decisive clink. "The first guests usually start arriving around 10, he said. "Miners coming down from the hills mostly. Sometimes a family passing through. You will need to have the rooms ready." "They already are," Olivia said. "I worked on them last night and finished this morning. Fresh linens, clean floors, water pitchers filled." Thomas felt that uncomfortable shifting in his chest again. "You have been awake all night." "I will sleep tonight," Olivia said with a shrug. "I wanted to prove I could do the job." "I gave you the job already. You do not need to prove anything." "Yes, I do," Olivia said quietly, meeting his eyes. "I need to prove it to you, but more importantly, I need to prove it to myself. For the past 4 months, I have felt like I was drowning, Mr. Caldwell. This is the first time I have felt like maybe I can swim." The rawness in her voice caught Thomas off guard. He saw past the competent exterior to the grief underneath, and recognized it because he carried the same weight himself. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two people marked by loss, standing in a dusty saloon in the middle of the Arizona desert. Then Thomas cleared his throat and looked away. "Get some rest before the guests arrive. That is an order, not a suggestion." "Yes, sir," Olivia said, but he caught the hint of a smile on her lips as she turned away. The days fell into a pattern. Thomas ran the saloon while Olivia managed the rooms upstairs. She proved to be everything she had promised: efficient, discreet, and tireless. The rooms filled up with regular guests who appreciated the clean sheets and the occasional batch of biscuits or cornbread that Olivia left out for them. Word spread, and soon Thomas found himself turning away travelers because all 6 rooms were occupied. "You should expand," Olivia suggested one evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival. She was helping him close up the saloon, wiping down tables while he counted the day's receipts. "Build more rooms. You could easily fill 10, maybe 12. "I am not interested in running a hotel," Thomas said. "The saloon is enough." "But you are leaving money on the table," Olivia persisted. "And it is not just about profit. People need places to stay. Good, clean places where they are treated fairly. You could provide that." Thomas looked at her, this woman who had arrived with nothing and had somehow found the energy to care about his business prospects. "Why does it matter to you? You get the same wage whether we have 6 rooms or 60. Olivia set down her rag, considering her answer. "Because I believe in building something," she said finally. "My husband, Robert, he had dreams of expanding his shop, of making it into something that would last beyond our lifetimes. We never got the chance. Maybe I just want to see someone else's dreams come true, even if they are not mine." "I do not have dreams anymore," Thomas said, the words coming out harsher than he intended. "I have a business that keeps me fed and a roof over my head. That is enough." "Is it?" Olivia asked softly. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you are just going through motions, Mr. Caldwell. You are alive, but you are not living." Thomas felt anger flare in his chest. "You have known me for 2 weeks. You do not know anything about how I live." "You are right," Olivia said, not backing down despite the edge in his voice. "But I know something about grief. I know what it looks like when someone builds walls around their heart because they are afraid of being hurt again. I see it every time I look in the mirror." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Thomas wanted to argue, to push her away with words sharp enough to maintain the distance he needed. But looking at Olivia, seeing the understanding in her amber eyes, he found he could not do it. "I am sorry about your husband," he said instead, the words stiff and awkward. "I should have said that before." "And I am sorry about your wife," Olivia replied. "Jonathan told me what happened, that she died of fever." Thomas felt his whole body tense. "My brother talks too much. He cares about you. That is not a crime." "It is not helpful either," Thomas said. He moved behind the bar, putting a physical barrier between them. "We should finish closing up." Olivia nodded, reading the dismissal for what it was. She completed her work in silence, then bid him good night and headed upstairs. Thomas listened to her footsteps, counting them until her door closed, and only then did he let out the breath he had been holding. She was getting too close, seeing too much. He would need to reinforce his boundaries, keep things strictly professional. It was the only way to protect what was left of his carefully constructed emotional armor. But that night, as he lay in his narrow bed, Thomas found himself thinking about what she had said. Was he really just going through motions? The question troubled him more than he wanted to admit. The incident with the drunk cowboy happened on a Saturday night 3 weeks after Olivia had arrived. The saloon was crowded, filled with miners celebrating their weekly respite from the brutal work in the hills, and Thomas was too busy pouring drinks to notice the trouble brewing in the corner. The cowboy's name was Jake Hendricks, and he had been drinking steadily since sundown. He was a ranch hand from one of the big spreads north of town, young and stupid in the way that cheap whiskey could make a man. When Olivia came downstairs to tell Thomas that one of the guests needed extra blankets, Hendricks took it as an invitation. "Hey there, pretty lady," he called out, his words slurred. "Why do you not come have a drink with me?" Olivia barely glanced at him. "No thank you, sir, I am working." "Come on," Hendricks persisted, pushing back from his table. "One drink, I will make it worth your while." Thomas saw the exchange and started moving around the bar, but Olivia handled it before he could intervene. "I said no thank you," she repeated, her voice firm but polite. "Now please excuse me." Hendricks reached out and grabbed her arm. "I was not asking, sweetheart." What happened next occurred so quickly that most of the patrons missed it. Olivia twisted her arm free with a practiced motion, stepped back, and fixed Hendricks with a look that could have frozen the desert at noon. "Touch me again," she said, her voice dropping to a level that somehow cut through the noise of the crowded saloon, "and you will regret it." But Hendricks was too drunk to recognize danger when it stood 5 feet 6 inches tall and wore a calico dress. He lunged forward, reaching for Olivia again, and this time Thomas was there. He caught Hendricks's wrist in mid-grab, applying just enough pressure to make the cowboy gasp. "The lady said no," Thomas said, his voice deadly calm. "I suggest you listen." "This is none of your business, Caldwell," Hendricks snarled, trying to pull free. "Everything that happens in this saloon is my business," Thomas replied. He increased the pressure on Hendricks's wrist, forcing the younger man to his knees. "And right now, you are making me very unhappy. You have 2 choices. Walk out that door under your own power, or I throw you out and you do not come back. Ever." The saloon had gone quiet, all eyes on the confrontation. Hendricks looked around, saw no support in the faces surrounding him, and the fight went out of him. "Fine," he spat. "This place is a dump anyway." Thomas released him and stepped back, positioning himself between Hendricks and Olivia. The cowboy stumbled toward the door, pausing only to deliver a parting shot. "Everyone knows what widows are good for," he said with an ugly leer. "You are not fooling anybody with that respectable act." Thomas moved before his brain could catch up to his body. He grabbed Hendricks by the collar, spun him around, and delivered a punch that sent the cowboy sprawling onto the dusty street outside. The few patrons on the boardwalk scattered as Hendricks landed hard, blood streaming from his nose. "Do not ever come back," Thomas said, standing in the doorway, his hand still clenched in a fist. Hendricks picked himself up and staggered away into the darkness, leaving a trail of curses in his wake. Thomas turned back to find the entire saloon staring at him. He realized his hands were shaking, not from fear but from rage. "Show is over," he announced. "Drink up or get out." The normal noise gradually resumed, conversations picking up where they had left off. Thomas looked around for Olivia and found her standing near the stairs, her face pale but composed. "Are you all right?" he asked, crossing to her side. "I am fine," she said, "but you did not have to do that." "I can handle drunk cowboys." "I know you can," Thomas said, "but you should not have to." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. Olivia reached out and gently took his hand, uncurling his still clenched fist. Her fingers were cool against his heated skin. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for defending me, but for seeing me as someone worth defending." Thomas looked down at their joined hands, at the way her slender fingers rested against his palm, and felt the walls around his heart develop their first crack. "You should get some rest," he said, pulling his hand away with what felt like physical effort. "I will handle things down here." Olivia nodded and headed upstairs, but Thomas could feel her presence for hours afterward, as if she had left an imprint on more than just his hand. That night marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Thomas found himself more aware of Olivia's presence, noticing small details he had deliberately ignored before. The way she hummed while she worked, always the same melody that he eventually recognized as an old hymn his mother used to sing. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The quiet competence with which she handled difficult guests, never losing her temper but never backing down either. He caught himself watching for her in the mornings, listening for the sound of her footsteps on the stairs. He began to time his breaks to coincide with hers, finding excuses to linger in the kitchen when she was preparing meals for the guests. They talked about small things at first, safe topics like the weather and the state of the roads, but gradually the conversations deepened. "Tell me about your husband," Thomas said one afternoon when they were taking inventory of supplies in the storeroom. It was the first personal question he had asked her, and he saw surprise flicker across her face. "Robert was a good man," Olivia said after a moment. "Steady and kind. We married when I was 19. He was 23, just opening his shop in Prescott. We had 5 years together." "Did you love him?" The question came out before Thomas could stop it. Olivia paused, a bag of flour in her hands. "I cared for him deeply. He was my best friend. But if I am being honest, what we had was more partnership than passion. We were two people who needed each other and found comfort in that need." "Does that sound terrible?" "It sounds honest," Thomas said. "What about you and your wife?" Olivia asked, turning to face him. Jonathan mentioned her name was Sarah. Thomas felt the familiar tightening in his chest, but for the first time in 3 years, he found himself wanting to talk about her. "We met in Tucson," he said. "I was working as a ranch hand, saving money to buy this place. She was a teacher at the mission school. She was everything I was not, educated, refined, full of hope for the future. I never understood what she saw in me." "Maybe she saw what I see," Olivia said softly. "A good man trying to do right in a hard world." Thomas shook his head. "I failed her. When she got sick, I could not save her. I brought in every doctor within 100 miles, tried every remedy anyone suggested. Nothing worked. She just slipped away and I was powerless to stop it." "That was not failure," Olivia said, and there was a fierceness in her voice that startled him. "That was love. You fought for her until the end. Robert had been sick for weeks before I even realized something was wrong. He hid it from me because he did not want me to worry. By the time I knew, it was too late. I never got to fight for him. I would have given anything for that chance." They stood there in the dim storeroom, surrounded by sacks of grain and canned goods, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Thomas felt truly seen by another person. "I am afraid," he admitted, the words dragged from somewhere deep inside, "of feeling anything again. Of letting someone matter." "I know," Olivia said. "I am afraid too, but fear is not the same as wisdom, Thomas. Sometimes it is just fear." She had used his first name, he realized, not Mr. Caldwell but Thomas, and somehow it felt right, like a door opening that he had not known was closed. The Arizona summer blazed on, each day hotter than the last, and the relationship between Thomas and Olivia continued to evolve in ways both subtle and profound. They developed routines, small rituals that belonged only to them. Morning coffee shared in the quiet before the saloon opened. Evening walks around the perimeter of the property, ostensibly to check for needed repairs, but really just an excuse to talk. Sundays, when the saloon closed early, they began having dinner together in the kitchen, cooking meals that were far more elaborate than either would have made alone. Thomas found himself looking forward to these moments with an intensity that should have alarmed him, but instead felt like waking up from a long sleep. Olivia made him laugh with her wry observations about their guests. She challenged him on business decisions, pushing him to think bigger than just day-to-day survival. She listened when he talked about Sarah, never jealous of a dead woman's memory, understanding that the past did not diminish the present. For her part, Olivia seemed to bloom in the stability that Quartzsite offered. The haunted look faded from her eyes, replaced by something lighter. She made friends among the townspeople, particularly Martha Chen, who ran the general store, and Elena Rodriguez, the sheriff's wife. Thomas would see them together sometimes, laughing over tea, and feel a warmth in his chest at knowing Olivia had found community. But with the growing closeness came growing tension. Thomas was acutely aware of every accidental touch, every moment when they stood too close in the confined spaces of the saloon. He caught himself staring at Olivia's mouth when she spoke, wondering what it would be like to kiss her. At night, alone in his room, he fought battles with himself about the wisdom of letting this continue. Olivia was 24 to his 32. She had a whole life ahead of her, opportunities he had no right to interfere with. She deserved someone who believed in the future, not a man who had given up on dreams. He told himself this repeatedly, but his heart was no longer listening to his head. The moment everything changed came on a Sunday evening in late August. They had finished dinner and were washing dishes together, a companionable silence between them. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising one of the rare monsoon storms that occasionally swept across the desert. "We should close the windows upstairs," Olivia said, drying her hands on her apron. "I do not want the rooms to get soaked." "I will help," Thomas said. They worked their way through the rooms, securing shutters and closing windows against the coming storm. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain and cooling the oppressive heat. By the time they reached Olivia's room at the end of the hall, the first fat drops were beginning to fall. Thomas crossed to the window while Olivia lit a lamp against the gathering darkness. He was pulling the shutters closed when lightning split the sky, illuminating the desert in stark white light. The thunder followed almost immediately, shaking the building. "I love storms," Olivia said behind him. "They make everything feel clean." Thomas turned to find her standing by the lamp, its golden glow casting her in warm light. Her hair had come partly loose from its pins, falling in waves around her shoulders. She looked young and beautiful and so alive that it hurt something deep in his chest. "Olivia," he said, and realized he had no idea what he wanted to say next. She crossed to him, moving with a sureness that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "I need to tell you something, Thomas. I have tried not to say it, tried to respect your boundaries and keep things professional. But I cannot anymore." "Do not," he said, even as everything in him wanted her to continue. "We should not do this." "Why not?" Olivia asked, stopping just in front of him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. "Because you are afraid. Because you think you do not deserve to be happy again. Or because you think I do not know my own mind." "All of those reasons," Thomas said roughly. "And because you are young and you have options and you should not waste them on a broken-down saloon keeper who has forgotten how to feel." Olivia reached up and placed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. "You are not broken, Thomas Caldwell. You are hurt, and those are different things. And I do know my own mind. I know that when I am with you, I feel safe and seen and valued. I know that you make me laugh and challenge me and never treat me like I am fragile. I know that somewhere along the way, I have fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, made more powerful by the storm raging outside. Thomas felt every defense he had built crumble in the face of her honesty. "I am afraid," he admitted, "of losing someone again, of not being enough." "I am afraid too," Olivia said, "but I am more afraid of letting fear keep me from living. Robert and we had something good, but it was never this. This feeling like my heart is going to burst every time you walk into a room, this ache when you are not near, this certainty that whatever comes, I want to face it with you." Thomas raised his hand and cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I do not know if I can do this. Be what you need." "I need you to be honest," Olivia said. "I need you to tell me if you feel anything for me, or if I have been imagining this connection between us." In answer, Thomas bent his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like a question being asked. But when Olivia responded, her arms coming up around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of all the loneliness and longing they had both been carrying. Outside, the storm broke in full force, rain hammering against the roof, wind howling around the building. But inside Olivia's room, wrapped in each other's arms, Thomas and Olivia found their own kind of storm. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words rusty from disuse but absolutely true. "I think I have loved you since you walked into my saloon and refused to back down. It terrifies me, Olivia, but it is real." "Then be terrified with me," Olivia whispered. "We will figure out the rest together." They stood there holding each other while the storm raged outside, two wounded souls choosing to trust in the possibility of healing, choosing hope over fear, choosing each other. That night marked the true beginning of their love story. Thomas stopped fighting his feelings and allowed himself to embrace the future Olivia represented. They courted properly, because Olivia insisted that, despite the unusual circumstances, she wanted to do things right. Thomas found himself doing things he had not done in years, bringing her wildflowers from the desert, taking her on picnics in the foothills, even attending Sunday services at the small church in town, because it mattered to her. The townspeople of Quartzsite watched the transformation with a mixture of pleasure and relief. Thomas had been a ghost for 3 years, present but not participating in the life of the community. Seeing him smile again, hearing him laugh, it felt like the town itself was healing from an old wound. "About time you rejoined the living," Sheriff Rodriguez told him one afternoon when Thomas stopped by to discuss adding more rooms to the building. "I am starting to think you might be right," Thomas admitted. "That woman is good for you," the sheriff continued. "She has spine, that one. Saw her dressing down a drummer who tried to shortchange her on supplies. Man practically ran out of town." Thomas grinned. "She does not suffer fools." "Neither did Sarah," the sheriff said gently. "But that does not mean she would have wanted you to stop living when she died. You know that, right?" It was the closest anyone had come to directly addressing Thomas's grief, and he felt the familiar tightness in his chest. But this time, instead of shutting down, he considered the words. "I am starting to understand that," he said. "Took me long enough." As September arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures, Thomas made a decision. He had been carrying Sarah's wedding ring on a chain around his neck since her death, unable to let it go but also unable to put it away. One evening, after closing the saloon, he went to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. Sarah's grave was marked by a simple wooden cross that Thomas maintained carefully. He stood there in the gathering dusk, turning the ring over in his fingers. "I will always love you," he said to the quiet grave. "What we had, it was real and it mattered. But I am alive, Sarah, and Olivia makes me want to stay that way. I think you would have liked her. She is strong like you were. Stubborn too. He knelt and buried the ring at the base of the cross, covering it with earth. It felt right, this gesture of letting go without forgetting. When he stood, his chest felt lighter than it had in years. Olivia was waiting for him when he returned, sitting on the steps of the saloon in the twilight. She took one look at his face and knew. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am better than all right," Thomas said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "I am ready. For a future, for us." "I am glad," Olivia said softly, "because I was thinking those extra rooms you are planning to build. We could make some of them into a proper living space. A home for a family, maybe." Thomas looked at her, his heart full to bursting. "Olivia Whitmore, is that a proposal?" She laughed, the sound like music in the desert evening. "I am a modern woman, Thomas Caldwell. I am allowed to express my intentions." "Well then," Thomas said, pulling her close, "allow me to express mine. Will you marry me, build a life with me? Take a chance on this broken-down saloon keeper and his expanding business?" "Yes," Olivia said, and kissed him as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. To all of it, yes. They were married on a cool October morning in the church Olivia had been attending. It was a small ceremony, just a few close friends and Jonathan, who had traveled from Prescott to stand as Thomas's best man. Martha Chen stood with Olivia, and there were tears in her eyes as the couple exchanged vows. Thomas had been nervous before the ceremony, worried that committing to Olivia would somehow dishonor Sarah's memory. But as he looked into Olivia's amber eyes and promised to love and cherish her, he felt only rightness. This was not about replacing what he had lost, but about embracing what he had found. The reception was held in the saloon, which Olivia had transformed with wildflowers and white bunting. The whole town turned out, bringing food and well wishes. Thomas found himself surrounded by people who had been strangers just months ago, now friends celebrating his happiness. "She is good for you, brother," Jonathan said, clapping Thomas on the shoulder. "I am glad you listened to me for once. You are taking credit for this?" Thomas asked with a raised eyebrow. "Absolutely," Jonathan said with a grin. "If I had not sent her your way, you would still be brooding behind that bar, pretending you did not need anybody." Thomas could not argue with that. "Thank you," he said seriously, "for caring enough to meddle." As evening fell and the party wound down, Thomas and Olivia slipped away to the living quarters they had prepared on the second floor. The expansion project had been completed just in time for the wedding, creating a comfortable suite of rooms that would serve as their home. "Mrs. Caldwell," Thomas said, trying out the name as he closed the door behind them. "Mr. Caldwell," Olivia replied with a soft smile. "That sounds rather nice." Thomas crossed to her and began carefully removing the pins from her hair, watching as the dark blonde waves tumbled down around her shoulders. "Have I told you today how beautiful you are?" "Only 3 times," Olivia said, her hands moving to unbutton his vest. "But I could stand to hear it again." "You are beautiful," Thomas said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "And brave and strong and everything I never knew I was looking for." They came together in the lamplight. Two people who had learned that love did not erase loss but could coexist with it. That second chances were not about forgetting the past, but about honoring it while building toward the future. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a celebration of survival and hope and the courage it took to trust in happiness again. Later, wrapped in each other's arms, Olivia traced patterns on Thomas's chest. "I was thinking," she said, "we should turn the old room I was using into a nursery." Eventually, Thomas felt his breath catch. "You want children?" "I want a family with you," Olivia said. "If that is what you want too." Thomas thought about Sarah, about the children they had planned to have but never got the chance to conceive. For a moment, grief touched him, but it was softer now, more bittersweet than agonizing. "I would like that," he said. "Very much." The months that followed were the happiest Thomas could remember. The business thrived under their combined management. Olivia's attention to detail and warm hospitality made the boarding rooms the most sought-after accommodations in Quartzsite, while Thomas's expansion of the saloon to include a proper restaurant brought in families, alongside the usual clientele of miners and cowboys. They worked together seamlessly, their different strengths complementing each other. Where Thomas was cautious and methodical, Olivia was willing to take calculated risks. Where she sometimes got caught up in details, he kept sight of the bigger picture. They argued occasionally, both being strong-willed people, but they learned to fight fair and always went to bed reconciled. In the spring of 1883, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas over breakfast on a Sunday morning, her face glowing with nervous excitement. "Are you sure?" Thomas asked, setting down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "As sure as I can be," Olivia said. "Martha confirmed it. She has had 6 children of her own, so she knows the signs. We should see Doc Patterson to be certain, but Thomas, I am almost sure." Thomas came around the table and pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by a tangle of emotions. Joy, fear, gratitude, and love so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. "We are going to be parents," he said, the reality of it hitting him. "We are," Olivia confirmed. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Thomas admitted. "But yes, I am happy, more than I have been in years." The pregnancy was not easy. Olivia suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and Thomas found himself hovering anxiously, trying to help while feeling utterly useless. But Olivia bore it all with characteristic determination, refusing to let discomfort slow her down more than absolutely necessary. As her belly grew, Thomas found himself gripped by fears he had not anticipated. What if something went wrong? What if he lost Olivia the way he had lost Sarah? The terror of it sometimes woke him in the middle of the night, and he would reach for Olivia in the darkness, reassuring himself with her warm, solid presence. "I am strong," she told him one night when she caught him watching her with worry in his eyes. "And Doc Patterson says everything is progressing perfectly. You need to have faith, Thomas." "I am trying," he said, "but I cannot stop thinking about all the things that could go wrong." Olivia took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly. As if on cue, the baby kicked a strong flutter against his palm. "Feel that," she said. "That is life, Thomas. Strong and insistent, our child is a fighter just like we are. We are going to be fine." Thomas wanted to believe her, and most days he managed it. He threw himself into preparing for the baby's arrival, building a cradle with his own hands, painting the nursery a soft yellow color that would work for either a boy or a girl. Jonathan sent gifts from Prescott, soft blankets and tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small. The baby came on a cold December night, arriving 2 weeks earlier than expected. Thomas had been closing up the saloon when Olivia appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale. "It is time," she said simply. Thomas felt his heart stop and then restart at double speed. He helped Olivia to their bedroom while shouting for someone to fetch Doc Patterson and Martha Chen. The next hours were the longest of his life. Unlike Sarah's death, which had been a slow fade, childbirth was immediate and visceral. Thomas stayed with Olivia the whole time, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her brow, feeling utterly helpless as she labored to bring their child into the world. "You are doing so well," he told her over and over, the words inadequate but all he had to offer. "This baby better be worth it," Olivia gasped during a particularly hard contraction, and Thomas nearly laughed at the mixture of pain and determination in her voice. Dawn was breaking over the desert when their son finally arrived, entering the world with a lusty cry that was the most beautiful sound Thomas had ever heard. Doc Patterson placed the baby in Olivia's arms, and Thomas looked down at his son, his child, and felt his entire world reorganize itself around this tiny, perfect person. "He is beautiful," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "Look what we made, Thomas." "You are amazing," Thomas said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Both of you." They named him James Robert Caldwell, honoring Olivia's father and her first husband. Thomas had suggested it, wanting Olivia to know that he did not begrudge her past any more than she begrudged his. "Are you sure?" Olivia had asked. "I do not want you to feel like you are in competition with Robert's memory." "I am not competing," Thomas assured her. "Our son can honor both the past and the future. Besides, Robert was part of your story, and your story is part of mine now, all of it." Fatherhood transformed Thomas in ways he had not anticipated. He had thought himself incapable of the kind of joy he felt holding James, watching him sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. The fear was still there, always lurking at the edges, the terror of losing someone he loved. But Thomas was learning to live with fear instead of being paralyzed by it. James was a healthy, happy baby who seemed to thrive on the constant activity of the saloon. He learned to sleep through noise and chaos, to the point where silence actually woke him. Olivia joked that he would probably grow up to be a saloon keeper himself. As James grew from infant to toddler, the business continued to prosper. They hired staff to help with both the saloon and the boarding rooms, freeing up Thomas and Olivia to focus on their growing family. In the fall of 1885, Olivia became pregnant again, and this time a daughter joined the family the following summer. They named her Sarah Marie, and Thomas wept when he held her for the first time. It had been Olivia's suggestion to name their daughter after his first wife, and it felt like a final healing of old wounds. She would have liked knowing there is a Sarah Caldwell growing up strong and loved in Quartzsite, Olivia said, and Thomas knew she was right. Life settled into a rhythm of beautiful chaos. James, at 3 years old, was constantly underfoot, helping in the way that toddlers do, which often meant creating more work than he solved. Sarah was a placid baby who smiled at everyone and seemed utterly content with the world. Thomas found himself surrounded by love and noise and life, and it was everything he had once thought he would never have again. The years passed in a blur of milestones and ordinary moments that somehow added up to extraordinary happiness. James started school at the small schoolhouse in Quartzsite, proving to be as stubborn and determined as both his parents. Sarah followed a few years later, quieter than her brother but with a will of iron when she set her mind to something. The saloon and boarding house became one of the most successful businesses in Quartzsite. Thomas and Olivia were respected members of the community, known for fair dealing and generous hearts. They helped newcomers get established, extended credit to miners down on their luck, and hosted community gatherings that brought the whole town together. In 1890, when Thomas was 40 years old and Olivia was 32, they welcomed a third child, another son they named Daniel. He arrived during a spectacular thunderstorm, and Olivia laughed through her labor pains, saying their son clearly had a flair for the dramatic. 3 children, Thomas marveled that night, looking at Olivia holding their newborn while James and Sarah slept peacefully in their rooms down the hall. "How did we get so lucky?" "We chose to believe in second chances," Olivia said simply. "Both of us. We could have stayed locked in our grief, Thomas. Heaven knows we had reason enough, but we chose differently." Thomas thought about that night in Olivia's room during the monsoon storm, when they had first admitted their feelings for each other. It felt like a lifetime ago and also like yesterday. "I almost sent you away," he said. "That first day you walked into the saloon. I almost told you I did not have any work for you." "But you did not," Olivia said. "Because somewhere under all that grief and fear, you were still a good man who could not turn away someone in need. That is who you have always been, Thomas Caldwell. You just forgot for a while." As the children grew, Thomas made sure they knew about Sarah and Robert, the people who had come before and shaped who their parents were. He told them stories about their namesakes, making sure those memories were honored and preserved. The children absorbed these stories naturally, growing up understanding that love was not a finite resource, but something that expanded to encompass everyone who mattered. The turn of the century brought changes to Quartzsite. The railroad was expanding, bringing more people and commerce to the Arizona territory. Thomas and Olivia adapted with the times, modernizing the boarding house and expanding the restaurant to cater to the influx of travelers. But the heart of their business remained the same: hospitality offered with genuine warmth and care. In 1902, James, now 19 years old, announced his intention to study law in Tucson. Thomas felt a mixture of pride and nostalgia, remembering his own time in that city as a young man. Sarah, at 17, had become an accomplished artist, whose paintings of the desert landscape were starting to attract attention from galleries in larger cities. Daniel, at 12, showed signs of following his father into the family business, always asking questions about how things worked and why decisions were made. "They are growing up so fast," Olivia said one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the desert they both loved. "They are good people," Thomas said. "You raised them well." "We raised them well," Olivia corrected. "Together." Thomas reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. 20 years had passed since Olivia had walked into his saloon, and his love for her had only deepened with time. There were streaks of gray in her dark blonde hair now, and fine lines around her eyes that came from decades of smiling. To Thomas, she was even more beautiful than she had been at 24. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here in Quartzsite, you could have gone anywhere, done anything." Olivia turned to him with surprise. "Regret it? Thomas, this is my home. You are my home. Our children, our business, our life together, this is everything I ever wanted. Even when I was difficult, when I tried to push you away, especially then," Olivia said firmly. "Because you pushed and I pushed back and we found our way to each other. That is what matters. Not the easy times, but the hard ones we got through together." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Two people who had learned that loss did not have to be the end of the story, that love could be found more than once, that second chances were real for those brave enough to take them. In 1906, James returned from Tucson with his law degree and a fiancée, a spirited young woman named Catherine, who reminded Thomas powerfully of Olivia at that age. They were married in the same church where Thomas and Olivia had exchanged vows, and the whole town turned out to celebrate. Sarah married a painter from California a year later, someone who understood her need to create and supported her ambitions. They settled in San Francisco but visited Quartzsite regularly, bringing with them stories of the wider world beyond the desert. Daniel, true to his nature, took over the day-to-day operations of the saloon and boarding house when Thomas turned 56 in 1908. Thomas had not wanted to retire completely, but his body was starting to feel the accumulated weight of decades of hard work. Olivia convinced him it was time to step back, to enjoy the fruits of their labor while they were still young enough to appreciate them. "Young is a relative term," Thomas joked, but he agreed. Daniel had proven himself more than capable, bringing fresh ideas while respecting the traditions that had made the business successful. Retirement suited Thomas better than he had expected. He and Olivia traveled, visiting their children and seeing parts of the country they had never had time to explore. But they always came back to Quartzsite, to the desert that had witnessed their love story, to the community that had embraced them. In the spring of 1910, Jonathan passed away in Prescott after a sudden illness. Thomas traveled north for the funeral, grieving the loss of his younger brother who had always believed in him, even when Thomas had stopped believing in himself. "He gave me you," Thomas told Olivia the night he returned from Prescott. "I never thanked him properly for that." "He knew," Olivia assured him. "Every time he saw us together, every letter we sent telling him about the children, he knew. You did not need to say the words." By 1912, Thomas and Olivia were grandparents 4 times over, with more grandchildren on the way. Their home, which had once been a place of solitude and sorrow, was now constantly filled with the laughter of children and the warmth of family. On a cool December evening, almost exactly 30 years after Olivia had first walked into his saloon, Thomas and Olivia stood together on their porch, watching the sun set over the desert. Thomas thought about that young man who had believed his life was over at 32, who had built walls around his heart and convinced himself he was better off alone. "What are you thinking about?" Olivia asked, reading his contemplative expression. "About the day you arrived," Thomas said. "About how close I came to sending you away, about how different my life would have been if I had." "But you did not," Olivia said, leaning into his warmth. "You took a chance on a desperate widow with nothing to offer but hard work and hope." "You offered me everything," Thomas corrected. "You gave me back my life, Olivia. You taught me that loving again was not a betrayal of the past but an honoring of it. You showed me that second chances are real." "We showed each other," Olivia said. "I was just as lost as you were, Thomas, just as afraid. We saved each other." They stood there as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside their home, they could hear Daniel and his wife preparing dinner, their voices mixing with the babble of grandchildren playing. It was a symphony of ordinary domestic noise, and to Thomas, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. "I love you," he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he had spoken them in Olivia's room during a monsoon storm. "I love you too," Olivia replied. "Always have. Always will." They went inside together, hand in hand, 2 people who had learned that the heart's capacity for love was infinite, that loss and joy could coexist, that sometimes the best things in life came from the chances you took, when everything in you said to play it safe. The saloon that had once been Thomas's hiding place had become a family legacy. The rooms that Olivia had transformed from dusty neglect into welcoming hospitality continued to serve travelers from across the growing nation. And in Quartzsite, Arizona, the story of Thomas Caldwell and Olivia Whitmore became the kind of legend that gave people hope, a reminder that it was never too late to open your heart, that second chances were worth the risk, and that love, when found and nurtured, could build something that lasted beyond a single lifetime. Thomas lived to see Arizona become a state in 1912, a moment that felt symbolic somehow, as if the territory they had called home was finally coming into its own, just as he had under Olivia's gentle persistence and fierce love. He lived to see his grandchildren grow, to hold great-grandchildren, to watch his family tree extend branches he never could have imagined during those dark years after Sarah's death. On a warm spring day in 1920, at the age of 70, Thomas Caldwell passed away peacefully in his sleep, Olivia's hand in his, surrounded by 3 generations of the family they had built together. His last words to his wife of nearly 40 years were simple: "Thank you for knocking on my door." Olivia lived another 8 years, remaining active in the business and the community until the end. She passed away quietly in 1928 at the age of 70 and was buried next to Thomas in the Quartzsite cemetery. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, were the words she had requested. She believed in second chances. The saloon and boarding house remained in the Caldwell family for generations, a testament to what two broken people had built when they chose hope over fear, love over loneliness, and second chances over the safety of solitude. And in Quartzsite, on quiet evenings when the desert wind whispered through the streets, old-timers still told the story of the widow who knocked and the saloon keeper who almost sent her away, and how they had found in each other the courage to love again. Their story became a reminder that life's greatest gifts often come disguised as risks, that the heart's capacity for healing is as infinite as its capacity for love, and that sometimes, when you have lost everything, a knock on the door can change your life forever. Thomas and Olivia's love proved that second chances were not just possible, but could lead to happiness beyond what first chances had ever promised, that the future did not diminish the past, but stood beside it, honoring what was while celebrating what could be. In the end, their legacy was not just the successful business they built or the family they raised, but the proof they offered that love could bloom more than once, that grief did not have to be the final word, and that two people willing to be brave together could build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. They had both arrived in that saloon as survivors, and together they had learned to thrive, creating a love story that would be remembered long after the Arizona desert reclaimed the buildings they had called home.